Okay, year nine. So obviously the first character we need to know really, really well for these stories is our protagonist, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. So there's a couple of things that we need to understand about him. The first thing is that we learn about Sherlock Holmes through the eyes of another character, through the eyes of Dr. Watson. So all of the short stories in the novels, including the ones that we're going to read, are narrated by his friend Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson is a very observant character, so he gives a very, very specific and detailed account of the character. And he describes Sherlock Holmes as a sharp and highly intelligent individual. He's obviously very impressed by him, and he conveys that impression to us as a reader. So we too are sort of delighting in how amazing, eccentric, mad, but in a positive way Sherlock Holmes is. Sherlock Holmes is described as the world's first and only consulting detective. So he's immediately placed as something impressive, something unique. He holds a unique position in society in terms of his occupation, but also in terms of his ability within that. He's world renowned in terms of how successful he is, and he's pursued criminals in not only London, but across Europe within these stories. Now, the way that Holmes is physically described is quite interesting, and we know that authors often include really key details in their descriptions of characters that give us clues about that character. You guys do this in your own writing all of the time. So some of the ways that Holmes is described is having sharp and piercing eyes. Now, the piercing nature of his eyes is suggesting this sense of him being incredibly astute, being able to see metaphorically beyond what is obvious, to see through disguises or lies or manipulations. This very perceptiveness is demonstrated by the way that his eyes are described there. He's got a thin hawk-like nose, and again the reference to hawk-like, which relates to the idea of a bird of prey, something who is incredibly good at sort of seeking and devouring what they're looking for. So we get this idea of perhaps ruthlessness, but also the intensity of that within the description of his hawk-like nose. And then an air of alertness and decision, so that he carries himself in a way which is always on top of things. Alert means to be kind of always observing, always thinking. We know that he's described as manic, and again that kind of links to this idea of being alert. Now, Sherlock Holmes, as we know, takes great pleasure in solving mysteries. He also takes great pleasure in being the person that does that. He's quite competitive. He enjoys outwitting others. And he also has a sense of justice. So justice links to ideas of morality, right and wrong. He is a moral character, and he does believe in right, wrong, good and evil, and in playing his part in that. Now, all of those things are really positive, but actually Sherlock Holmes isn't a very likeable character. He's not a typical hero in the way that he's presented to us as someone to aspire to be. It's more that we're impressed by him rather than we want to be him or that we like him. And some of the reasons for that are that he's quite manipulative, and actually he's rather arrogant. He actually ridicules his associates, including Dr. Watson, and he sets them up to look foolish. When he's revealing the answer to a crime, he often places Watson within the position of a kind of someone who is rather unintelligent, who has missed a few tricks along the way. Although we know that Watson is an intelligent character, he's actually almost spoken down to by Holmes. And we as a reader sort of have that impression as well, that we should have noticed the things that he has noticed and we haven't. Holmes is also very proud of his mental capacities. He likes to talk about them a lot, and he's very dismissive to those he thinks are less intelligent than himself. Like in yesterday's lesson, that includes members of the police force. And then finally, one of Holmes's flaws as a character, which arguably makes him more interesting, is that he demonstrates some of these more deviant characteristics, like the ones we learnt about yesterday in the context lesson. Holmes struggles with addiction. So he is presented multiple times as injecting cocaine, including in the story that we're going to read next week, particularly when he's bored. So Holmes is seeking excitement, he's seeking new opportunities, way to use his brain, and he actually uses drug taking as an outlet for that, which perhaps demonstrates a weakness in his character. he can also be very complicated, very moody, and he's very untidy. So he can be quite snappish with other characters, and he can do things which are quite unexpected, all of which demonstrate a character that's interesting to read about and learn more about.